It seems like the one constant in the baseball card hobby is change. When I was buying 15-cent packs of cards in 1975, the hobby was in a much different place. My first entrance to the world of baseball card collecting was buying this 1976 book, The Complete Book of Baseball Cards by Steve Clark. This book introduced me to the whole universe of baseball cards: Topps, Bowman, T206, and Gaudies. Before that, the only way I knew what other cards even looked like was through the 1974 Hank Aaron Special cards. You can look at the cover of the book to get an idea about what's going on in the hobby. You don't see any T206 cards, Clemente cards, no Jackie, no 52 Mantles. Inside the book, it seems like collectors were most interested in rare and error cards. In fact, the book devotes a whole chapter to them. The author makes it seem like the 1969 Aurelio Rodriguez Bat Boy card should be worth something, even though it was never corrected and is not rare. The rare cards back in 1976 were, of course, the Honus Wagner T206, as well as the Eddie Plank, the Sherry Maggie error card, and the 1933 Gaudi Nap Lajoie. Other cards that were considered rare and in demand in the pre-eBay days were regional food issues. These included Loomis Peanut Butter, Dandy Potato Chips, Conn's Wieners, and Drake's Cookies. The book talks a bit about them, but you don't hear much about them today. There isn't much mention of star cards, and nothing about the value of rookie cards. They weren't a thing back then. Who were the most sought-after superstars in 1976? Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Roberto Clemente, and Sandy Koufax. Some things don't change. But probably the most valuable card in the hobby today, the 1952 Mantle, is barely mentioned at all. If you wanted to buy cards in the 1970s, you probably had to start with one of the baseball-themed magazines, like Baseball Digest or The Sporting News. This is a 1975 issue my grandmother bought me, and inside are a number of ads from dealers. You could either buy a complete set of Topps cards for $15, or write for a catalog or list if you needed the singles. Back in the 1970s, my friends and I were focused on building complete sets. That's just what you did. Once you had bought all the packs and traded with your friends, you inevitably still needed a few cards. There weren't many options for getting these cards unless you went through mail order companies. There were no baseball card stores, and shows only seemed to happen in major cities a few times a year. As a result, my earliest sets went uncompleted for years. For me, the first Beckett Guide in 1979 was a major step forward. Over and above the prices of the cards, you got the names of some dealers as well as specific publications like the Trader Speaks, Baseball Hobby News, Sports Collectors Digest. Here, you could connect with dealers or other collectors and get the cards you needed. This is when I started ordering some cards on my own. Near-mint condition cards I've been lusting after for years, but were unavailable in the neighborhood. The prices in this first Beckett Guide tell us a lot about where the hobby was in the late 1970s. Look at the prices for the 1975 set. Both Robin Yount and George Brett cards were listed for 8 cents each, barely above the price for commons. Need more evidence? The 1969 Reggie Jackson rookie was priced at $1.25, less than half the price of a Mays or Mantle card. Rookie cards were just not a thing at all. In these pages, you can see that set building was a major focus. This guide has the prices of every single card in these 1970 sets. It's perfect for buyers like me who needed to know the cost of that 1978 George Hendrick to complete my set. What were the most valuable cards in 1979? Beckett has a top 10 list here. Most of these cards are familiar, but the bottom 3 might not be. I admit, I had to look them up to see what they were. What about the 1952 Topps Mantle rookie? It's mentioned here. It's a $500 card, well out of the budget of any kid. But there's very little focus on it in the book. It certainly was not the iconic face of the hobby. That still belonged to the T206 Wagner. Another thing that stands out is that Nolan Ryan wasn't yet a big deal in the hobby. He was a star in the middle of his career, but his cards didn't attract too much attention, even though he had thrown 4 no-hitters and had almost 3,000 strikeouts. If you look at this dealer's ad, he's not even mentioned. Under the 1968 set's value, Beckett put the cost of a mint Ryan rookie card at only $1, 4 times less than Mantle or Mays. Let's look at this ad more closely. The cards that we think of as valuable now, the 1954 Aaron rookie, the 55 Clemente and Koufax, the Mantles, were all considered valuable then too. But they seemed attainable then. You could get one in good condition on a kid's budget if you focused on it. Here's another difference from the 1970s, the way that a card's condition was looked at. Check out this diagram and explanation page from the back of the Beckett Guide. What collectors consider so important today, the centering of the card, was called uneven border. It's clear here that it's just one of many factors used in determining the condition of a card, not the single most important thing. In the 1970s, it seemed to us kids that the man-made factors, the busted corners, the creases, the marks, were the things we wanted to avoid. Most of our cards came out of the pack off-centered. It's just something we took for a given and didn't notice. What was it like as a kid to collect in the 1970s? Well, let me show you. This is the album I got when I was 9 years old and some of the first cards I ever bought. Even if you didn't know much about baseball, you could tell who the stars were by the All-Star cards. At the top of the heap was Hank Aaron. He was the man back then. These binder sheets were also considered the ultimate in protection for our cards. Now, though, it's obvious they weren't big enough and likely damaged the cards, particularly the corners. As I learned more about the hobby, I'd find older cards through kids in the neighborhood. Even if they were commons, they were pretty unique and got a place in my binder. For the most part, we kept our cards in rubber bands, organized by team. We'd mark off the back of the checklist to see how close we were to completing the set. In hindsight, a terrible practice, but it gave you a sense of accomplishment nonetheless. Most of our cards were bought in packs costing 15 cents to a quarter. Do the math to see how many 10-card packs it would take to complete a 660-card set. Would have made a lot more sense to buy the whole set for $15 out of a magazine. But that would have taken away the fun. The downside was, with the way Topps double printed some cards, you could end up with a lot of doubles, or even 6 or more of the same card. The hobby has changed tremendously in the last 40 years. I hope you've enjoyed this retrospective, and I'd love to hear your own stories about what it was like to collect in the old days. Post your comments or questions below. And collect what you love.